My son-in-law and his girlfriend moved in with us for a couple of months, and it ruined my marriage. I remember exactly how the light slanted through the windows on the afternoon my brother-in-law's car rattled into our driveway last May. It was warm that day, and the kids were laughing in the backyard, tugging on the sprinkler hose. I stood at the kitchen sink, drying a plate, and glanced out to see his old sedan come to a stop. It's funny, the little details we recall. The small moments that end up becoming pivotal turning points in our lives. I still see the cracks in the windshield. I hear the loud thump of his trunk, the sound of his sneakers dragging against the asphalt, the hope that blossomed inside me. Hope that this arrangement would be brief and that we could help him land on his feet was so bright then, yet it dimmed, slowly, week by week, until it felt like we'd been pitched into a darkness from which I couldn't find my way out. When my husband first asked me if we could help his younger brother, I was hesitant, but also sympathetic. After all, my brother-in-law, Bil, was just 19, a difficult age, and he was escaping a home life that was less than supportive. I told myself, we have enough love here, enough space. We can help him get started in the adult world. That was always who I wanted to be. A caring person, someone ready to extend a hand the way people once did for me. It was supposed to be 2 months, maybe 3, maximum. That was the promise my husband and Bil both made, and it was a promise I chose to believe. There was a buzz of excitement in the first week. The kids, my 2 little ones, under the age of 5, loved their uncle. To them, he was like a fun older cousin, chasing them around the living room, playing silly games of hide and seek. Our living room is a modest space, a simple sectional, some scattered toys, children's artwork pinned to the walls. It normally felt small but cozy. With Bill there, it felt lively at first. He was cracking jokes, talking about all these grand plans. I remember one of the first nights he stayed with us. We were seated around the dining table, and he said he was planning to enroll in community college while rooming with a couple of friends. He had it all mapped out, or so he claimed. He'd pay a small amount of rent to us each month, do some chores, and then, as soon as those friends were ready, he'd go. I remember we shared a smile that night, me and my husband, grateful that we could help. In that moment, it felt like we were genuinely doing something good. But as spring gave way to early summer, the situation began to show cracks. It was little things at first. A cereal bowl left on the coffee table, the spoon still crusted with milk the next morning, a soda can stuffed between couch cushions, hoodies dropped on the hallway floor. I'd see them as I ferried the kids to bed or while picking up random toys, and I told myself, he's 19. This is what teenagers do. He just needs gentle reminders. I'd bring it up to him kindly, and he'd grin sheepishly, promising he'd clean up later. Sometimes he even did. But there were enough times he didn't that it wore on. I also started to notice that a couple of months had become maybe in the fall. When I asked casually if he'd looked at any apartments, he'd shrug. Not yet, he said. I'm not sure where my friends are going to end up. When I asked if he was still planning to do that community college route, he avoided making eye contact. Yeah, eventually, he'd say, and then trail off. It was a routine he perfected, a wide-eyed hesitation that suggested he was caught off guard by reality. Every time I'd feel that stir of frustration. But my husband, who worked 50 to 60 hours a week, kept telling me, he's a good kid. Just young. Give him time. Time. Such a tricky thing. When you're 19, time feels endless. But when you're a mother with 2 small children, clocking in and out at your own job, trying to balance everything, time is precious. I tried to be patient. I tried to remember the days when I was starting out, how uncertain it all felt. I wanted to be empathetic, but that empathy was tested every day. By August, it was clear to me there was no real plan in motion. My Bill hadn't saved nearly as much money as he'd promised. He'd talk about these random parties he'd go to on weekends, or complain about how early his shifts were during the week. Sometimes he pitched in on chores or left a bit of cash on the kitchen counter for rent, but it was all half-hearted. The spark he had when he arrived, an eagerness to get on his feet, flickered away. He was comfortable. He had free meals, a warm bed, internet, video games, everything he needed. Meanwhile, my routine stayed the same. Get the kids up, feed them, drop them off at daycare if I was working that day, pick them up, cook dinner, do laundry, clean up the living room after they went to bed, all while juggling my own job. Occasionally, I'd find my husband crashed on the couch after his long shifts, half asleep in front of the TV. Even if I was exhausted, I'd keep going. I had to. Someone had to ensure that the house didn't descend into chaos. Sometimes my resentment flared, and I'd catch a glimpse of it in the bathroom mirror while I brushed my teeth late at night. I'd see the anger in my own eye. It wasn't just that we had another body in the house. It was that my BIL wasn't giving me straight answers, and my husband would just deflect my questions or say, relax, it's going to work out. But there was no evidence that it was working out. I was starting to think that I was the only one losing sleep over, the only one who cared about the original plan. Still, I tried to squash those thoughts. After all, what kind of sister-in-law or wife would I be if I couldn't find compassion? The end of summer rolled into fall, and then we were in the midst of holiday conversations. By December, the tension had grown thick. but we rarely confronted it head-on. My husband always tried to keep the peace, but in so doing, he overlooked how suffocated I felt. Then the request arrived. BL's girlfriend, who lived out of state, wanted to move in with us too. My reaction was immediate, a resounding, absolutely not. I couldn't understand how anyone would think it was okay to stuff another person into our already tight home. My husband insisted it'd only be for a month. 1 month. He repeated that. Bill swore she had a job lined up here, that they just needed a little more time to pool resources and get their own place. I was seething inside. I remember standing in the kitchen, listening to my husband plead his case, feeling heat crawl from my chest to my neck. "You're overreacting," he said, when he saw the look on my face. Overreacting? We'd promised ourselves Bill's stay would be temporary, but now we were adding another person? The bigger problem in that moment was the shift in how he saw me. He made it sound as if I was this cold, heartless person who would leave family out in the snow. There was a part of me that wanted to yell, to remind him how many months we'd been carrying this extra weight, but I could see where this was going. We'd argue, the kids would overhear, it would turn ugly. Already my husband was insinuating I didn't care about his family, and so I swallowed my anger and turned away. I let it fester and didn't speak much. That day after the argument, I drove to the grocery store, kids in the back seat, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I pulled into the parking lot and just sat there for a moment, telling my children, "Mommy's fine," when they asked what was wrong. But I wasn't fine. I felt betrayed. I felt like my husband wasn't taking my side. But mostly, I felt helpless, as though my home, the place that should be a sanctuary, was no longer mine. And so, 2 days before Christmas, Bill's girlfriend arrived. There was a quick flurry of activity, a lot of boxes, a giant duffel bag, the smell of winter air clinging to her coat. For about a week, there was the sense of hustle. Her job search, she said, was top priority. We'd sit at dinner and she would casually mention putting in applications. But after the holiday glow subsided, it seemed like her promises evaporated. She never showed me any proof of her applications, never mentioned if she got any calls back. When I'd ask in passing, "Hey, how's that job search going?" she'd offer a vague, "Yeah, I'm still looking," then vanish into the bedroom she shared with BIL. As the new year rolled in, I began noticing that neither of them was paying rent. Previously, BIL would hand me a small envelope each month, sometimes only half the amount we had agreed upon, but at least it was something. Now, that stopped altogether. My husband seemed too tired to enforce it, or maybe he just didn't care. In one of our heated conversations, I said to him, "I don't want to be their landlord, but we have bills, we have kids to feed. We can't keep paying for them." He got defensive, telling me, "Beal works full-time. He just needs time to catch up on his expenses. Give him a break." Only I wasn't seeing any of that money come our way. Meanwhile, I had 2 extra adults generating laundry, using hot water, burning through groceries. The house itself felt different. That cozy, welcoming atmosphere was replaced by tension lurking in every corner. If I tried to vacuum the living room early on a Saturday, I'd hear BIL or his girlfriend groan from their makeshift bedroom, complaining about the noise. Dishes piled up in the sink. Takeout boxes were left on the counter. I'd go to the fridge to grab milk for the kids, only to find a random half-eaten sandwich or leftover plate wrapped haphazardly, the sauce dripping onto other items. And then, of course, there was my own guilt, because whenever I mustered the nerve to speak up, I was met with shrugs and the subtle implication that I was nagging. The stress seeped into my marriage. My husband and I began fighting more often. He was always too tired to really talk about it, and I was too fed up to keep quiet. The kids started noticing, asking why mommy and daddy were shouting. It broke my heart. These were the children I was trying to protect, the ones I wanted to raise in a peaceful home. Instead, I felt like we were letting them down by constantly bickering. The arguments turned nasty at times. More than once, we ended up sleeping in separate rooms. That alone frightened me because it was so unlike us. My husband would say, "They're my family," as though it was all that mattered. And I'd retort, "And so are we, me and the kids." Over and over, we circled back to that same conflict. He believed that by helping his brother, he was doing right by family, while I believed that by letting this drag on, he was neglecting his immediate family, our marriage, our household, our children's well-being. Whenever I felt myself losing ground, I'd remember the strain on our finances, the tension thrumming in the walls of our house, and I'd stew in frustration all over again. The final straw for me, ironically, came on a mundane day. I had just returned from work, exhausted, arms full of groceries, trying to herd my children inside. We'd run out of diapers, so I had to make a separate stop. The kids were cranky, hungry, pulling at my shirt. I stepped into the living room and nearly tripped over a video game controller. Bill and his girlfriend were sprawled on the couch watching some show, laughing, oblivious to my entrance. Nobody got up to help me with the groceries. The dishwasher was open, half-loaded, water dripping onto the tile. I realized with a sudden, painful clarity that I couldn't go on like this. I found my husband in the bedroom, unbuttoning his work shirt after a long shift. I was fuming. "Did you know rent hasn't been paid at all this month?" I asked, slamming the door. He frowned, clearly annoyed, but he tried to brush me off. I'm too tired for this. I'll talk to them tomorrow, he mumbled. But I'd heard that tomorrow never came. Tomorrow was always delayed. I erupted, telling him how disrespectful I felt it was that we were carrying two other adults who didn't even pick up after themselves, let alone pay rent or keep us updated on their supposed plan to move out. He fired back, saying I was heartless, that I knew the situation from the beginning. We agreed to help them, he kept insisting. He made it sound like I was a monster for not wanting to help them forever. My insides churned, the frustration building up until I felt physically ill. I spat back, no, we did not agree to this. We agreed to a few months. It's been almost a year. Our voices rose. The kids, who were just outside, began to cry. I could hear them. It shattered. I left the room, tears stinging my eyes, arms shaking with pent-up rage and sadness. That night, I cried myself to sleep on the couch, hugging a spare blanket. My husband was in our bedroom, door locked. In the dim light of the living room, I felt so alone. And ironically, the reason for that loneliness was the presence of two other people who shouldn't have still been there. January inched toward February, and each day I felt more like a stranger in my own home. I tried everything to avoid confrontation. I stopped asking Bill any questions about his plans to move out. I stopped checking to see if his girlfriend was sending out resumes. Instead, I directed all my fury and concern at my husband, which only made him defensive. We got locked into this toxic cycle. I'd confront him, he'd accuse me of wanting to throw his family out onto the street. I'd deny it, and we'd end in tears and slammed doors. The emotional toll was staggering. My job performance suffered. I was exhausted all the time. My appetite became erratic. Sometimes I'd binge on snacks at odd hours just from stress. Other days, I could barely look at food. My children, in their innocent way, would ask, "Where's mommy's smile?" or "Why is mommy sad?" which left me feeling even more like I was failing them. In early March, things escalated. One evening, after I put the kids to bed, I walked into the living room to find a complete mess. Wrappers on the floor, empty cups stacked on the coffee table, jackets strewn everywhere. Beal and his girlfriend had just left the house, presumably out to some event or a friend's place. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. I just stood there, looking at the chaos, and felt a bitterness welling up. It was like an out-of-body experience, like I was watching myself, arms hanging limp at my sides, tears prickling my eyes. I cleaned up the mess in silence, rinsing cups in the sink, stuffing wrappers in the trash, picking jackets up from the floor. With every item I picked up, I felt more anger. How dare they? How dare they treat our home like a crash pad, a free motel? And how dare my husband dismiss my complaints when I was literally handling everything on my own? That was when I realized maybe he and I were no longer in agreement about the boundaries of helping family. Maybe we had never really spelled them out, but I knew that if I didn't do something drastic soon, I would implode. My marriage would implode. I tried to approach my husband again that weekend. I attempted to speak calmly, but I was near tears. "We can't go on like this," I told him quietly, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm losing my mind here." He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw real concern in his eyes, a flicker of the man I married. But then he clenched his jaw. He repeated the same lines. "He's my brother. I can't just dump him." At that, I nearly broke down. "This has gone past helping," I said. "We're enabling him." But it was no use. The conversation spiraled once more. Voices rose. Accusations flew. He slept on the couch that night. Or maybe I should say I let him have the bedroom for once. Since I'd been on the couch so many times, I'd practically made it my second bed. The tension was thick the next morning, and we barely spoke. The kids noticed, but neither of us had the emotional wherewithal to explain it to them. In the days that followed, I tried to find some perspective. A part of me felt like maybe I was in the wrong. Maybe I was being too harsh. But then I'd walk by the doorway to Bill's room and see the girlfriend on her phone, ignoring the messy floor, ignoring the chaos, ignoring me. If I knocked and asked if she could help with dinner cleanup or watch the kids for just 20 minutes so I could shower, she'd say something like, "I'm kind of busy right now," and that would be that. So no, I wasn't being too harsh. My anger was justified. I started talking with close friends about the situation, explaining bits and pieces. They would nod sympathetically, but also encourage me to set firm boundaries. "You can't let this continue," my best friend said, her face full of concern. I'd sigh and shrug, feeling paralyzed, but that conversation planted a seed. I realized that if I didn't act soon, I was going to watch my marriage crumble and my sanity slip away. By mid-spring, the arguments with my husband had gotten so bad we weren't even sharing a bedroom. He'd moved some of his clothes into the guest room closet. We both rationalized it as not wanting to wake each other at odd hours, but we knew better. It was distance, plain and simple, and Bill and his girlfriend were still here, still seemingly without any plan to leave. I can't even count the number of times I overheard them talking about going out for dinner, or spotted them carrying bags of new clothes or expensive gadgets. Meanwhile, they weren't paying a dime in rent and were using every resource in our home for free. Then came one particularly awful night. I had gotten off work late. I was so tired I wanted to collapse onto the sofa, but I had to start cooking dinner for the kids. I went into the kitchen and found the fridge practically emptied of all the groceries I'd bought just 2 days prior. The leftover roast chicken I'd planned to stretch for another meal was gone. The fresh vegetables were picked over. Even the bag of grated cheese I kept in the back for quick quesadillas was used up. Bill and his girlfriend had apparently decided on a late-night snack the previous evening and never replaced anything. I felt rage, like a flash of lightning in my chest. I hunted down my husband in the garage, where he sometimes retreated to get away from the noise. "Do you realize they ate almost everything in the fridge last night?" I hissed, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. He gave me a weary look, as though he had nothing left to offer. "What do you want me to do about it?" he asked. "Talk to them," I practically shouted. "This is our family's food." But even as I said the words, I knew this conversation was heading. We'd had it a million times. He'd argue that they were just hungry, that they probably didn't realize that we needed to be clearer, and once again, the blame would circle back to me for being too uptight. The final snap in my mind came that same night. After I'd scrounged together a makeshift dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar, the only thing left in the pantry, I set the kids up with a quick cartoon so I could think. My heart raced. I felt like I was at a crossroads. If I didn't do something now, I never would. So, I typed up a simple budget list on my laptop, comparing our monthly expenses against the portion Bill was supposed to contribute. I was stunned by how much money we'd been covering for him and his girlfriend. If they'd just paid what we'd agreed upon, we could have been okay. But they hadn't paid in months. We were losing hundreds of dollars each month, money that should have gone to the kids' daycare, to groceries, to savings. That night, once the kids were tucked in, I marched into the garage again, where my husband sat on a tool bench, scrolling on his phone. There was no yelling this time. I simply told him, "Listen, we need to have a serious conversation about boundaries. If Bill and his girlfriend aren't gone by June 1st, if they don't start paying rent now, I am leaving. I will find an apartment for me and the kids, and we're gone." I had never spoken so coldly to him before. My voice felt foreign to my own ears. He stared at me in disbelief, maybe even fear. I saw him swallow hard. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. I softened slightly, tears welling in my eyes. "Because I can't live like this anymore," I said. "I love you, but I can't handle this chaos. If they're not out, or if they don't start paying and respecting the house, I'm taking the kids and leaving." The look on his face was heartbreak and anger all at once, but I stood my ground. I'd never given him such an ultimatum before. I hated doing it, but I saw no other choice. For the first time in a long while, he didn't snap back. Instead, he just nodded, pressed his lips together, and looked away. That moment was like a switch had flipped. I still remember the sense of relief and dread swirling in my chest as I walked away. I felt a flutter of guilt. Ultimatums are never a good sign in a marriage, but also a sense of empowerment. If I needed to walk out, I would. Over the next few days, something in the dynamic changed. My husband actually tried to talk to Bill. I overheard bits of their conversation. My husband explaining that they owed rent, that they needed to start looking for places, that I was at my wit's end. But BL's response was mostly mumbled. At one point, I heard him say, "We can't just move out. Do you know how expensive that is right now?" And I wanted to burst into the room and remind him that everything is expensive and that we were managing it all while still trying to feed, clothe, and raised 2 little kids, but I stayed out of it. I'd made my stance clear. It was my husband's turn to enforce it. In the meantime, I made some changes around the house. First, I stopped cooking for them. I used to make big dinners that could feed everyone, partly out of habit and partly hoping it would bring us all together. But after that ultimatum, I stopped. I prepared meals only for me and the kids, enough portions for us alone. I left the kitchen promptly after finishing. The first night I did this, Bill asked where the extra food was. I told him point blank, "I'm only cooking for my kids now." He looked stunned, but he didn't argue. His girlfriend stood in the corner, arms folded, looking affronted, but they didn't say much. Second, I moved all the laundry detergents, bathroom supplies, even the extra toilet paper, into my bedroom closet. I wasn't going to let them use up our supplies without contributing. On one occasion, Bill's girlfriend knocked on my bedroom door, asking if I had any more shampoo. I just looked at her. "Not for you," I said politely, forcing a thin smile. "You'll have to get your own." She blinked at me as though I'd struck her. Then she turned on her heel and left. It felt petty, but it also felt necessary. Third, I changed the internet password. That might sound extreme, but I wanted them to feel the consequences. When Beal discovered he couldn't log in to watch his favorite shows, he came to me, confused. "Oh, I changed the password," I told him, not elaborating. He looked outraged, but didn't raise his voice. Maybe he knew it wouldn't get him anywhere. Inside, I felt the tension of it all, the knowledge that I was effectively drawing a line in the sand. But at least I was reclaiming a measure of control. Meanwhile, I gave myself the same deadline. If they weren't out by June 1st, or at least in the process of leaving, I would gather my children's things and find a small apartment. I spent my evenings browsing listings, scrawling out a budget, figuring out how to make it work on just my salary. It was tight, but doable. I started putting aside a bit of money whenever I could, just in case. I kept a bag of essentials tucked in the back of my closet, a sign that I was serious, even though the idea of uprooting my kids terrified me. My husband's demeanor changed as the days wore on. He was distant, sometimes sullen. Other times, he acted almost apologetic, trying to talk to me gently, asking how my day went. But I was still guarded. I'd been hurt by his betrayal of our original agreement. I felt like the only reason he was now willing to push his brother out was because I'd threatened to leave. That stung. I wished we could have come to a healthy compromise without it coming to ultimatums. But after months and months of being ignored and feeling taken advantage of, I realized sometimes you have to play hardball. For a week or so, Bill tried to do better. I'd see him making half-hearted attempts to do the dishes or pick up the living room before I got home, perhaps sensing that he was on his final strike. But his girlfriend remained indifferent, spending her days lazing around, glued to her phone or the TV. Not once did she mention job interviews again, and I no longer bothered to ask. I'd cut that emotional cord, let go of the naive belief that she actually wanted to contribute. May loomed closer, and with it, my resolve hardened. I told myself I'd know by mid-May if they had any actual plans. I mentally prepared for both outcomes. Them leaving, which would be a relief, or them refusing to budge, which would mean I was taking my kids and going. Oddly enough, as stressful as that possibility was, it gave me a sense of calm. For the first time in months, I had a plan that centered on my well-being and my children's. I wasn't helpless anymore. The second week of May, I noticed Bill was on the phone more often, talking in hushed tones. At one point, he gave me a nod when I walked by, like he wanted me to overhear him discussing an apartment application. I didn't engage, but inside, I allowed a small flicker of hope. Maybe he'd finally realized we were serious. Maybe they'd actually move out and we could salvage what was left of our marriage and sense of normalcy. On an otherwise quiet Sunday, a few days later, BL approached me in the kitchen. He cleared his throat awkwardly, looking nervous. We, found a place, he said. It's not super nice, but we can move in at the end of the month. We can pay you back rent next payday. He paused, glancing at me to see my reaction. My chest felt tight. I wanted to burst with 1,000 emotions. Relief, doubt, anger, maybe even gratitude that he was finally taking steps. But all I managed was a curt nod. That's good news, I said. Let me know when you need help packing. I couldn't muster much warmth, but I tried to be civil. In the next few days, I told my husband what BIL had said. He looked astonished, like he didn't expect BIL to follow through. I caught him leaning on the kitchen counter later, staring at the floor. I'm sorry it took this long, he said quietly. I nodded, tears threatening to spill over. Me too, I whispered. There was a sense of relief, yes, but also a lingering sadness at how far we'd let things deteriorate. True to Beal's word, they started packing. The house was filled with boxes again, reminiscent of the day his girlfriend had first arrived in December. It felt like a surreal rewind, but this time, I wasn't dreading it. I was counting down the days until that car pulled out of the driveway for good. It was messy. They left behind clutter and random items, but I felt the tension gradually lifting, like air finally moving in a stuffy room. By the time they actually left, on May 28th, a few days earlier than the June 1st deadline, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized was so heavy. The night they drove off, the house was quiet. It was just me, my husband, and the kids. We ordered pizza and watched a kid-friendly movie on the couch. The kids were thrilled to have their own living room back. My husband and I exchanged cautious smiles. There was so much that needed mending between us. Unspoken apologies, resentments that needed airing, but in that moment, we shared a sliver of peace. Over the next few days, we cleaned the spare room. I vacuumed the floors, wiped down the walls, laundered the curtains. With every swipe of the rag, I felt as though I was wiping away the tension that had hung over us for so long. My husband pitched in, scrubbing the windows, taking out the trash, hauling out the last of their stuff. It was a joint effort, and it felt almost therapeutic. We finally had a long talk, one where neither of us raised our voices. We admitted our faults. He apologized for dismissing my concerns, for letting things spiral. I apologized for shutting him out at times and letting my anger stew without directly addressing it sooner. It was painful to pick through the wreckage of those months, but also a relief to do so honestly. Financially, we took a hit from all those months without proper rent from them, but I started to see our bank account stabilize now that we weren't feeding and sheltering 2 extra adults. Emotionally, I felt a flicker of hope that my marriage might recover. It would take work, but at least we had the space and the quiet to do that work. My kids, bless their innocence, adapted quickly once it was just us again. They seemed happier, more relaxed. They'd run around, painting pictures in the living room, and I didn't have to worry about stepping over someone else's mess or hearing complaints about the noise. The house felt like ours once more. I realized, with no small amount of guilt, that I wasn't entirely blameless. I had let this happen. I'd been too passive at first, too fearful of conflict, too willing to be the peacemaker at my own expense. But I also recognize that wanting to help doesn't mean relinquishing all your boundaries. If someone is truly family, if they truly appreciate your help, they won't take advantage to the point of breaking you. A few weeks after they moved out, BL did contact me to say he understood why I'd been so upset, and he admitted he should have been more proactive. It was a stilted conversation, but I appreciated that small gesture. As for his girlfriend, I don't know how she felt about the situation or if she got a job. They went their way and we went ours. My husband and I both decided that, going forward, we'd have clear written agreements if we ever helped family in this capacity again, though we hoped never to repeat the same mistake. Reflecting on it all, I still feel echoes of frustration at how long it took for everyone to respect the basic truth, that my home is not a free motel, and that generosity shouldn't be mistaken for obligation. But I also feel proud that I stood up for myself in the end. Yes, it nearly broke my marriage, but it also led me to discover a hidden reservoir of strength, and in a strange way, it reminded my husband of the importance of listening to my concerns before they ballooned into crisis. I wouldn't wish those months on anyone, but I learned lessons I'll carry with me always. The importance of firm boundaries, the necessity of direct communication, the damage that can be done when resentment is allowed to fester in silence, and ultimately the realization that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone, and for yourself, is to say, enough. Now, nearly a year after Beal first arrived, our household is still healing, but it's ours again. My husband and I are finding our way back to the intimacy we lost. We still have arguments, but they're calmer, more measured. We're on the same team, rebuilding trust. The kids are thriving, no longer sensing that taut undercurrent of conflict. And for me, I can finally walk into my home at the end of a long day and feel, in my bones, that it belongs to me and my children. There's no cloud of uncertainty hovering overhead, no uneasy feeling that at any moment I'll stumble across a pile of someone else's mess. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how easily a kind gesture can spiral if boundaries aren't held firm. I remember the early days when Bill arrived, how I felt a mixture of hope and hesitation. Now, after all is said and done, I can't say I regret trying to help because I believe in giving people chances. But I've learned that it's okay to put your foot down when your generosity is abused. It's okay to say no more. That doesn't make you a villain. It makes you a person who respects themselves and the life they've built. In the end, I'm grateful I chose to stand up for my children, my home, and myself. And if that means I'm seen as a bad guy by some, then so be it. Because the truth is, no one else lives in your home but you. No one else shoulders the weight of your bills, your chores, your emotional labor. No one else has the right to tell you how long to extend your hand, or when you're allowed to pull it back. Learning that truth was difficult, but it has shaped me into someone who can set boundaries without shame or fear. I don't know what the future holds for Bill and his girlfriend. Maybe they'll find their footing, maybe they won't, but they'll do it without sinking my family's ship in the process. And as for me, I'm focusing on raising my kids in a peaceful environment and working with my husband to rebuild and strengthen our relationship. Sometimes, after the storm passes, you realize just how strong your walls can be and just how necessary it is to keep them intact.